This isn't getting processed. Verify it first. Problem solved.
Stop! Sir! I've been looking for you. That document was already cleared for verification.
That's why I told you to verify it.
The first thing Marcus Bell noticed was not the sound of the printer. It was the silence after it stopped. Inside the glass-walled lobby of Hawthorne Federal Bank, the morning rush moved around him like he was part of the furniture. Customers stepped around polished marble floors, employees carried folders between offices, and the security guard near the entrance watched every person who walked in. Marcus was used to that. At 18, he had learned that people often decided what they thought of him before they heard him speak. They saw the hoodie under his jacket, the worn sneakers his grandfather had given him, and the young black man standing alone with a leather envelope. They rarely saw the paperwork. They rarely saw the 4 years of legal filings, family meetings, and financial planning that had brought him there. Marcus placed the envelope on the counter. "Good morning," he said. "I need assistance depositing this certified check." The bank manager, Richard Hale, looked up from his monitor. He was in his late 50s, with a perfectly pressed suit and a nameplate that read branch manager. His eyes moved from Marcus's face to the envelope, then back again. "What kind of account are we talking about?" Richard asked. Marcus answered calmly, "A trust account. The check is payable to me." Richard gave a small smile that did not reach his eyes. "Personally?" "Yes." The manager opened the envelope. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Richard's expression changed. The check inside was for $4.5 million. It was not handwritten. It was not suspicious looking. It carried official verification documents, legal certification, and the signature of the estate administrator who had managed Marcus's late grandmother's investment holdings. Marcus had spent months preparing for this moment. Richard did not look impressed. He looked uncomfortable. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Marcus noticed the question. Not, "Can we verify this?" Not, "May I review the documents?" "Where did you get this?" "My family trust transferred the funds after the estate settlement," Marcus replied. Richard picked up the papers. "You're saying this is yours?" "Yes." The manager leaned back. A customer standing behind Marcus glanced over. An employee walking past slowed down for half a second before continuing. Richard lowered his voice. "Look, I don't know who helped you put this together, but large checks like this require certain expectations." Marcus frowned slightly. "Verification. Documentation. Appropriate account history. I brought the documentation." Richard looked at the papers again. Then he did something Marcus did not expect. He folded the check. Marcus stepped forward. "Please don't damage that document." Richard looked at him. "I'm protecting the bank." "No," Marcus said quietly. "You're assuming something about me before checking the information." The manager's face tightened. "This is not personal." Marcus had heard those words before. They were usually spoken right before something became personal. Richard walked toward the office printer near the side wall. Marcus watched as the manager placed the certified check beside the machine. "What are you doing?" Richard did not answer. The machine started. A sharp mechanical sound filled the lobby. Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Stop!" Several people turned. Richard reached for the check. Marcus moved closer. "That is a legal financial instrument. You cannot destroy it because you think it looks unusual." Richard looked back at him. "I'm not comfortable processing this." Then he fed the check into the shredder beside his desk. The machine pulled it in. Paper disappeared. $4.5 million reduced to strips in seconds. The lobby went quiet. Marcus stood still. Not because he had nothing to say, because he understood something important. The check was gone. But the transaction was not. The evidence was not. The question was not whether Richard Hale believed Marcus. The question was whether the bank could explain why a verified document connected to a legitimate account holder had been destroyed without authorization. Marcus slowly reached into his jacket and removed his phone. Not to record a confrontation, not to threaten anyone, to call the one person who had told him exactly what to do if something went wrong. 3 minutes later, a message appeared on the screen. "I'm coming to the branch now. Do not leave." Marcus looked toward the manager's office. Richard was already speaking to another employee, clearly believing the situation was finished. He did not know who had created the trust. He did not know why Marcus had been the only person authorized to receive the funds. And he definitely did not know why the bank president was about to walk through those doors. The message came before the footsteps. Marcus heard the lobby doors open, not loudly, not dramatically, just the soft mechanical release of the glass entrance and the quiet movement of someone who did not need to announce their arrival. A man in a charcoal suit entered carrying no briefcase and no entourage. He was followed by a woman from compliance and a regional operations director who immediately stopped speaking when he walked in. The security guard straightened. Several employees looked away. Richard Hale stepped out of his office. Then his expression changed. "Mr. Whitmore." The bank manager's voice was suddenly different. Not the confident tone he had used with Marcus. Not the patient voice designed to explain why a customer should accept a decision they did not agree with. This was careful. The man in the charcoal suit looked toward Marcus first, not Richard. Marcus noticed that. "I received a call about a destroyed certified instrument," the man said. His eyes moved toward the shredded paper beside the printer. "Is this the check?" Nobody answered immediately. Richard cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitmore, there has been a misunderstanding." The bank president looked at him. "A misunderstanding?" Richard nodded quickly. The young man presented a suspicious document. "I took action to protect the institution." The president did not respond right away. He walked toward the counter. "Did you verify the check?" Richard hesitated. "We began the process." "That wasn't my question." The lobby became uncomfortable. Marcus watched the difference between authority and intimidation. Richard had been comfortable when the only person affected was a teenager standing alone at a counter. He looked less comfortable when someone asked for the exact decision behind his action. "No," Richard admitted, "not completely." The president turned toward the compliance officer. "Was there a fraud alert?" She checked the tablet in her hand. "No." "Was there a legal hold?" "No." "Was the account flagged?" "No." Each answer landed harder than the last. Marcus noticed something else. The president was not asking whether Richard felt justified. He was asking what process Richard had followed. Richard shifted his weight. "Look, with respect, this was an unusual situation. A teenager presenting a multi-million-dollar check." The sentence stopped halfway, not because Richard realized what he had said, because everyone else did. Marcus looked down. For a second, he felt the familiar pressure in his chest, the feeling of being reduced to a category, a risk, a question, a problem to solve. The bank president looked at him. "What is your name?" "Marcus Bell." "And the account?" "Bell Family Legacy Trust." The president paused. Then he looked at the documents Marcus still held. "The Bell Family Legacy Trust?" "Yes." The compliance officer looked up from her tablet. "Wait." She stepped closer. "Marcus Bell?" He nodded. Her expression changed. Not because she suddenly discovered he was important, because she recognized the file. "The trust account was approved through Private Wealth Services 3 months ago," she said. "The beneficiary authorization was completed. The transfer was scheduled after the estate release." Richard looked confused. "You knew about this?" The compliance officer turned toward him. "The branch should have received notification." The president looked at Richard. "Did you check the internal notes?" Richard did not answer. That was the answer. Marcus watched as the room shifted, but he did not feel victorious. Not yet, because the shredded check was still sitting there, and the fact that people now knew his name did not erase what happened 5 minutes earlier. The president seemed to understand that. He picked up one of the torn pieces carefully. "Marcus, I want to apologize." Marcus looked at him. "I appreciate that. But I need something more than an apology." The president waited. "I need to know why the first assumption was that I was a problem instead of a customer." Nobody spoke. The sentence was not loud. It did not need to be. Richard looked away. The president placed the torn paper back on the counter. "You're right." He turned to the compliance officer. "Freeze any destruction activity at this branch involving customer documents until review is complete." Richard's face changed. "Freeze? Yes, but this was an isolated judgment call." The president looked at him. That is exactly what we need to determine. Marcus finally felt the tension in his shoulders begin to release. Not because the president knew him, not because the bank president had said his name, because for the first time that morning, someone was examining the decision instead of examining him. The compliance officer opened a new case file. "Mr. Bell, I'll need your statement." Marcus nodded. Then he looked at the shredded pieces of paper. "The check can be replaced." Everyone looked at him. But the reason it was destroyed matters. The president remained silent, because he knew Marcus was right. A missing document could be corrected. A broken process had to be understood. And somewhere inside Hawthorne Federal Bank, that process had just been exposed. The compliance officer moved Marcus away from the counter and into a small conference room near the back of the branch. It was the same room where customers usually signed mortgage papers, reviewed account changes, or discussed private financial decisions. Today, it became the place where Hawthorne Federal Bank had to answer a different question. Not how much money Marcus Bell had, but why nobody bothered to believe him before checking. Marcus sat across from the compliance officer, Elena Ruiz, while the bank president remained standing near the door. Richard Hale did not enter. That was intentional. Elena opened a digital report. "Before we begin, I want to explain the process," she said. "Your statement will be documented separately from the internal review. The purpose is not to determine whether you were upset. The purpose is to determine what actions occurred, who authorized them, and whether procedures were followed." Marcus nodded. That answer mattered. For the first time that morning, someone was treating the event like a process failure instead of a customer complaint. "What happened from the beginning?" Elena asked. Marcus looked down briefly. He thought about making the story shorter. He thought about leaving out the small moments, the hesitation, the questions that sounded ordinary until they stacked together. But he remembered something his grandfather used to tell him. A pattern is made of details. So he started there. "I arrived at 9:12, Marcus said. "I checked in at the service desk. I provided the check, the trust documents, and my identification." Elena typed. "What happened next?" "The manager asked where I got the check." She looked up. "Those were his exact words?" Marcus nodded. "Yes." Elena paused. "Did he ask for verification?" "No." "Did he request additional documentation?" "No." "Did he contact the trust department?" "No." Each answer created another line in the report. Marcus watched the screen fill. Facts. Times. Actions. Not emotions. That difference was important. Outside the room, Richard stood near the teller stations, watching employees pretend not to watch him. His authority had changed in less than an hour. Not because Marcus had humiliated him, because the questions had moved from Marcus's credibility to Richard's decisions. The bank president, Thomas Whitmore, approached him. "Richard." The manager turned. "Yes, sir? Walk me through your reasoning." Richard sighed. "I've worked in banking for 32 years. I know when something doesn't look right." Thomas kept his voice calm. "That wasn't the question." Richard looked frustrated. "I was trying to prevent fraud. Fraud prevention requires verification. I believed there was risk. Based on what?" Richard opened his mouth, then stopped. Thomas waited. That pause was longer than any argument could have been. Finally, Richard said, "The amount. The situation, the customer." Looked at him. "The customer?" Richard immediately realized the problem. "I mean his age and the circumstances." Thomas glanced toward the conference room. "Marcus Bell is 18 years old. He is also the authorized beneficiary of a trust account approved by our private wealth division." Richard remained silent. Thomas continued. "The issue is not that you notice something unusual. Employees should notice unusual activity. The issue is what you did after noticing it." Richard looked toward the shredded paper. "I made a judgment call." "No." Thomas shook his head. "You made a decision without completing the required steps. The distinction mattered. One described caution, the other described failure." Inside the conference room, Elena reached the final section of her report. "There is one more thing," she said. Marcus looked up. "What?" "The branch system shows your account had a note attached." "What kind of note?" Elena hesitated. "An internal customer profile note." Marcus waited. It says the account was considered high attention because of the size of the transfer. Marcus frowned. High attention? Yes. Who added that note? Elena looked at the screen. Richard Hale. The room became still. Marcus felt something heavier than anger. Recognition. The check being destroyed was not the first decision. It was the last one. Someone had already decided he needed extra suspicion before he walked through the door. Elena continued reading. There is another entry. What does it say? She looked uncomfortable. Review carefully before approving access. Marcus leaned back. The words were simple, almost harmless, but he understood what made them dangerous. A sentence inside a system could follow someone into every future interaction. A person who never met him could inherit someone else's assumption. Elena closed the file. Mr. Bell, we need to determine whether this note affected how you were treated today. Marcus looked through the glass wall toward the lobby. Richard was still standing there. For the first time, Marcus wondered if the shredded check had been the beginning of the problem, not the end. Because paper could be replaced. But a record inside a system could keep repeating the same mistake. Thomas Whitmore stepped into the conference room. His expression was serious. We need to talk about the account note. Marcus looked at him. Why? The bank president glanced at the report. Because I believe what happened today may not have started today. Marcus did not answer immediately. He looked at the account note displayed on Elena's screen. Review carefully before approving access. 7 words, no accusation. No obvious insult. Nothing that would trigger an alarm if someone saw it quickly. That was what made it dangerous. Marcus had spent enough time around legal documents to understand that the most damaging things were not always the loudest. Sometimes they were small instructions buried in ordinary language. A sentence. A checkbox. A note passed from one person to another. What does review carefully mean? Marcus asked. Elena folded her hands. In theory, it means additional attention for a high-value account. In theory? She glanced at the screen. In practice, it depends on how employees interpret it. Marcus looked toward the lobby. And how did Mr. Hale interpret it? Nobody answered. They did not need to. Thomas Whitmore stepped closer. That is what the investigation will determine. Marcus nodded slowly. He appreciated the restraint. The president was not rushing to accuse his employee. He was not making a public statement. He was not turning one bad decision into a simple story with an easy villain. But Marcus also understood something else. Sometimes organizations moved slowly because they wanted to be fair. Sometimes they moved slowly because they wanted time, and he needed to know which one this was. I want the account history preserved, Marcus said. Thomas looked at him. Why? Because if that note changed how people handled my account, I need to know when it started. Elena immediately began typing. Preservation request added. Thomas watched her. Then he nodded. Good. Marcus looked surprised. You agree? I do. The president walked toward the window overlooking the parking lot. When people hear a story like this, they usually focus on the biggest moment. He looked back at Marcus. The destroyed check. Marcus said nothing. But the bigger question is what happened before anyone touched the check. That sentence stayed with Marcus, because it matched what he had been feeling. The shredder was only the visible moment. The decision had happened earlier, much earlier. An hour later, the branch had changed. The normal customer traffic continued, but the atmosphere inside Hawthorne Federal Bank was different. A regional compliance team arrived. Employees who had watched the incident from a distance were now being interviewed separately. Richard Hale sat alone in his office. His door remained open, a small detail. But everyone noticed. For 30 years, Richard had been the person closing doors. Now other people were deciding when they opened. Thomas reviewed the initial findings with Elena. We found 3 other accounts with similar notes. Thomas looked up. Similar how? High-value accounts. New customers. Additional review language without a documented risk reason. Same wording? Elena hesitated. Same pattern. Thomas leaned back. Explain. One account belonged to a retired engineer. One belonged to a small business owner. One belonged to a young professional who received an inheritance. Thomas studied the file. Were they all treated differently? That's what we're checking. Check faster. Elena nodded, not because he was angry, because the question had changed. This was no longer only about Marcus. It was about whether a system had quietly learned to treat certain customers as problems before they became customers. Marcus sat in the bank's waiting area while his replacement check request was processed. He received several apologies. A teller offered him water. A supervisor offered to personally assist him. He appreciated the gestures, but something bothered him. The kindness appeared after the truth appeared. He wondered how many people never reached the point where someone important walked through the door. How many customers simply left? How many people accepted being treated differently because they had no reason to believe anyone would listen? His phone buzzed. It was a message from his grandfather's attorney. Heard there was an issue. Are you okay? Marcus typed a response. I'm okay. The money isn't the problem. He paused, then added, the sum was. He stared at the message before sending it, because that was the part nobody could replace. Not the check, not the account, not the transfer. Trust. Late that afternoon, Thomas Whitmore returned to the conference room. The new check approval was complete. The funds were secure. The immediate problem was resolved, but his expression told Marcus this conversation was about something else. We completed the first review, Thomas said. Marcus waited. The account note was created 18 months ago. Marcus frowned. 18 months? Yes, but the trust transfer only happened recently. Thomas nodded. That means the note was not created because of this transaction. Marcus felt a cold realization settle in. Then, why was it created? Thomas placed a document on the table. We are still investigating. Marcus looked at the paper. What do you know? Thomas took a breath. We know the note was added after your account profile was manually reviewed. By who? Thomas looked directly at him. Richard Hale. Marcus looked down. The answer was not shocking anymore, but it was heavier, because now the question was no longer, why did he destroy the check? The question was, why had Marcus Bell been marked as someone to doubt before he ever walked into that branch? Marcus stared at the document on the table. The paper was only 3 pages long. That almost made it worse. He had expected something complicated. A long explanation. A mistake buried under dozens of pages of banking language. Instead, the thing that had followed him for 18 months fit inside a few paragraphs. A customer profile note. A review instruction. A decision made by one person and inherited by everyone who came after. Can I see the original entry? Marcus asked. Elena looked at Thomas. The bank president gave a small nod. She turned the laptop toward Marcus. The screen showed the account history. Customer profile review completed. Additional caution recommended. Escalation advised before significant activity. Marcus read it twice. What significant activity? Elena answered carefully. Large transfers, new requests, changes to account access. Marcus looked at her. So basically anything unusual. Yes. And who decides what counts as unusual? Nobody answered immediately. That silence told him more than words could, because unusual was not a number. It was an interpretation, a person's judgment, a person's assumptions. Marcus leaned back. Who reviewed the account when this note was added? Elena typed. Then stopped. Her expression changed slightly. Richard Hale again. The same name, the same person. But this time Marcus did not feel anger. He felt tired, because the story was becoming clearer. Richard had not simply reacted badly in the lobby. He had built a version of Marcus before meeting him, and then he had met that version instead of the real person. Across the hall, Richard sat with the regional investigator. His hands were folded on the table. For the first time in years, he was the one answering questions. I followed my instincts, Richard said. The investigator looked at his notes. Your instincts led you to destroy a certified financial document? I believed there was a possibility of fraud. Based on what evidence? Richard hesitated. The circumstances. Which circumstances? Richard looked uncomfortable. The customer was young. The investigator waited. And Richard sighed. The amount was large. Anything else? No. The investigator wrote something down. Richard noticed. Are you suggesting I did something wrong? I'm asking whether your decision was based on documented risk indicators or personal interpretation. Richard looked away. "I've protected this branch for 30 years." The investigator nodded. "And that experience matters." Richard looked relieved for a moment. Then the investigator continued. "But experience can also create blind spots if nobody reviews how decisions are made." The relief disappeared. That evening, Marcus met his grandfather's former attorney, Daniel Brooks, at a small coffee shop 3 blocks from the bank. Daniel had handled the trust settlement. He was in his early 60s, with silver hair and a habit of reading documents twice before speaking. When Marcus finished explaining what happened, Daniel did not immediately react. Instead, he asked, "Did they restore your access?" "Yes." "Did they apologize?" "Yes." "Did they explain why?" Marcus shook his head. "Not yet." Daniel stirred his coffee. "That matters." Marcus looked out the window. Everyone keeps focusing on the check, because the check is easy to understand. "And the other part?" Daniel looked at him. "The other part is harder." "What part?" "The part where a person decides what kind of customer you are before you do anything." Marcus was quiet. Daniel continued. "Your grandmother spent 30 years building that trust. Not just money, relationships. She believed institutions only worked if people inside them were willing to question their own assumptions." Marcus smiled slightly. "She said something similar." "What did she say?" Marcus looked down. "She said, 'A system is only as honest as the person willing to admit when it failed.'" Daniel nodded. "That sounds like her." The next morning, Thomas Whitmore called Marcus back to the branch. This time, the meeting was not in the customer conference room. It was in the executive review room upstairs. Marcus noticed the difference: a larger table, more senior employees, a screen displaying documents. The setting itself carried a message. This was no longer a branch issue. Thomas began. "We completed the preliminary review." Marcus waited. "We found that the account note did not contain a specific fraud indicator." Marcus said nothing. "The note was based on a general concern about the account profile." "What does that mean?" Thomas looked uncomfortable. "It means the wording created additional scrutiny without clearly explaining why." Marcus nodded slowly. "And that scrutiny followed me." "Yes," the answer came quickly. No defense, no excuse, just acknowledgement. Thomas continued. "We also reviewed other accounts." Marcus looked up. "Other accounts?" "Yes." The room became quieter. "We found similar patterns." Marcus understood. The check had been his experience. But it might not have been an isolated one. "What happens now?" he asked. Thomas looked at the compliance team. "The bank will begin a formal internal review of customer profiling practices at multiple branches." Marcus listened carefully. "And Richard?" Thomas paused. "That decision will follow the investigation." Marcus appreciated the answer, because it was not revenge. It was process. But then Thomas added something unexpected. "There is one more thing." He placed another document on the table. "This came from the branch archive." Marcus looked down. It was an old review form. His name was on it, but the date was from before he ever received the trust. Before the money. Before the check. Before the account became valuable. Marcus looked at Thomas. "Why was I reviewed before I even had access to the funds?" Nobody answered. Because that was the question they had all been avoiding. And now it was sitting in front of them, on paper. Marcus did not touch the document, not yet. He had learned something important over the last 24 hours. Paper was not just paper. A piece of paper could be a contract, a promise, a warning. Or if someone placed the wrong words on it, a story about a person that was never true. "What is this?" Marcus asked. Thomas Whitmore looked at the document. "It is an archive customer review form." "I can see that." Marcus kept his voice calm. "What I'm asking is why my account was reviewed before I received the trust funds." Elena Ruiz pulled the file closer. "We're still tracing the original authorization. Who requested the review?" She looked through the records, then stopped. "There is no formal request attached." Marcus looked at her. "No request?" "No." "Then why was it done?" That question sat in the room. Nobody rushed to answer. Because now the problem was no longer one employee making a bad choice. It was a gap. A space where a decision existed without a clear reason. Thomas leaned forward. "Marcus, I want to be careful here. We have evidence of a review. We do not yet have enough information to say why it happened." Marcus nodded. That's fair. He looked back at the document. But I want to understand something. What? If a person gets labeled as a risk without a reason, how many employees see that label before anyone questions it? Nobody spoke. Because everyone in the room knew the answer. Too many. The investigation expanded over the next several days. Not with headlines, not with public statements, with spreadsheets, interviews, and uncomfortable conversations. That was the part Marcus had not expected. He thought accountability would feel like a dramatic moment, a person admitting they were wrong, a room recognizing the truth. Instead, it looked like people reading old files, comparing dates, finding patterns. It was slower. But maybe that was the point. Real corrections took longer than mistakes. Elena called Marcus 3 days later. "We found something." Marcus sat at his kitchen table when she called. His grandfather's old watch was sitting beside his laptop. A habit Marcus had picked up after the funeral. Whenever something became overwhelming, he placed the watch nearby. A reminder that important things were built over time. "What did you find?" Marcus asked. The original review was connected to a relationship manager transition. Marcus frowned. "A transition?" "Yes, your account was transferred between teams after the estate process began." "That doesn't explain the note." "No." Elena paused. "That's what we're looking at." Marcus waited. The previous relationship manager documented that the account was expected to receive a large transfer after legal approval. Okay. The note was added afterward. By Richard. Yes, Marcus closed his eyes briefly, so he changed the profile. Yes, after knowing what was coming. Elena did not answer immediately. She did not need to. At Hawthorne Federal Bank headquarters, Richard Hale sat across from Thomas Whitmore. This time there was no customer complaint in front of them, no destroyed check, no lobby witnesses. Only records. Thomas placed a folder on the table. "Richard, why did you add the additional review note?" Richard looked at the folder. "I don't remember the exact circumstances." Thomas opened the file. "You signed it. That was 18 months ago." "You signed it." Richard looked uncomfortable. "I was reviewing accounts during a transition period." "Many accounts?" "Yes. Only this one received this wording." Richard looked away. Thomas continued. "The previous manager documented the trust structure. The legal department approved the beneficiary process. Private Wealth Services confirmed the account." Richard said nothing. "So I'll ask again." Thomas's voice remained even. "Why did you add the note?" Richard leaned back. "Because I wanted to make sure the branch was careful." Thomas nodded. "That sounds responsible." Richard looked surprised. Then Thomas continued. "But responsible caution requires a reason." Richard's expression changed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that caution without a documented basis can become something else." Richard looked down. For the first time, he did not argue. Marcus returned to Hawthorne Federal Bank 1 week later. The branch looked exactly the same. Same marble floor, same counters, same printer near the manager's office. But the meaning had changed. A teller named Jasmine approached him. "Mr. Bell?" Marcus nodded. "I'm Jasmine. I was here the day everything happened." He recognized her. She had been the employee who looked away when Richard shredded the check. "I wanted to say something," she said. Marcus waited. "I should have spoken sooner." Her voice was quiet. "I saw what happened. I knew it didn't feel right, but I told myself it wasn't my place." Marcus looked at her. "What changed?" Jasmine glanced toward the conference rooms. "I realized staying silent was still a decision." That answer stayed with him. Because it was not perfect. She was not pretending she had been brave from the beginning. She had been afraid. And she was admitting it. Marcus respected that more than an easy apology. "Thank you for saying something now," he said. Jasmine nodded. Then she handed him a folder. "What's this?" "Your replacement check confirmation." Marcus smiled slightly. "The thing that started all of this." Jasmine looked at the folder. "No." She shook her head. "The check started the conversation." She looked toward the branch around them. "The system is what we're still fixing." Later that afternoon, Thomas met Marcus outside the bank. The review was not finished. More accounts needed examination. More decisions needed answers. But one thing had already changed. The board approved an independent customer review process, Thomas said. Marcus nodded. "That's good. It will take time." I know. Thomas looked at him. You know, many people in your position would have focused only on getting compensation. Marcus looked at the street. I wanted my money. A small smile appeared. Of course I did. Thomas smiled too. But that wasn't the only thing missing. Marcus looked back at the bank. No. He thought about the shredded paper, the note, the assumptions, the people who never got a president walking through the door. I wanted to know if someone else could walk in tomorrow and not have to prove they belonged before anyone checked the facts. Thomas nodded slowly, because that was the question that remained. Not whether Marcus Bell got his $4.5 million, he did. The harder question was whether Hawthorne Federal Bank had finally learned how easily a person could become a problem on paper before they ever became a customer in reality. 2 months later, Marcus Bell returned to Hawthorne Federal Bank. This time he did not walk through the doors carrying a certified check. He carried a notebook. The difference mattered. The first time he entered the branch, everyone looked at what he was holding and decided what kind of person he might be. This time, people knew his name. But Marcus had learned something during those weeks. Recognition was not the same thing as respect. Respect was what happened when nobody knew who you were and they still followed the right process. The branch lobby had changed slightly. The printer near Richard Hale's old office was gone. The counter where Marcus had stood had been redesigned. Small changes, visible reminders. But Marcus knew buildings could change faster than habits. He was there because Thomas Whitmore had invited him to a customer review meeting, not as a public relations gesture, not as a symbol, as someone whose experience had exposed a weakness in the system. Inside the conference room, several employees sat around the table. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked curious. One person looked familiar. Jasmine, the teller who had admitted she stayed silent, she gave Marcus a small nod. The meeting began with Elena Ruiz presenting the findings. The independent review examined 642 customer profiles across 5 branches. Marcus listened carefully. Of those, 37 contained additional review language without a clearly documented reason. A few employees shifted in their seats. 21 were corrected immediately. Thomas added, the remaining 16 required deeper review because the notes influenced how employees handled customer interactions. Marcus looked at the report. Did you find discrimination? The room became quiet. It was the question everyone expected. Elena answered carefully. We found inconsistent standards. Marcus waited. She continued. We found that certain customers were more likely to receive additional suspicion without equivalent documentation explaining why. She did not use dramatic words. She did not need to. The findings were enough. Richard Hale was no longer branch manager. The investigation concluded that he had violated internal procedures by creating unsupported customer risk notes and destroying a financial document without authorization. He was not publicly humiliated. He was not treated as a cartoon villain. He was given a formal disciplinary process. His employment ended after the review determined that the trust required for his position had been compromised. Marcus appreciated that distinction, because accountability was not revenge. It was a consequence connected to responsibility. After the meeting, Marcus stayed behind with Thomas. The bank president looked tired, not defeated, just aware. You were right about something, Thomas said. Marcus looked at him. What? When this started, everyone wanted to focus on the check. Marcus smiled slightly. Because it was easy. Yes, Thomas looked through the glass wall at employees working outside. A damaged document has a replacement process. He paused. A damaged relationship with customers is harder. Marcus closed his notebook. Are you going to change the training? We already did. Thomas handed him a document. The title read, Customer Decision Review Standards. Marcus skimmed it. It required employees to document specific reasons for additional scrutiny. It required secondary review for certain account decisions. It created a way for customers to request an explanation when a service decision affected them. This is good, Marcus said. Thomas nodded. But, Marcus looked up, but policies only matter if people believe them when nobody is watching. Thomas smiled faintly. That's exactly why we asked you to be here. Later that afternoon, Marcus visited his grandmother's old house. The The trust money had changed his future. That was true. He could attend the university he wanted. He could invest. He could build something meaningful. But sitting in the kitchen where his grandmother used to prepare Sunday dinners, he realized the money was never the entire inheritance. She had left him something harder, a standard. A belief that success meant more than getting through a door. It meant making sure the next person did not have to fight the same battle alone. His phone buzzed. It was an email from Hawthorne Federal Bank. The subject line caught his attention. Community Financial Access Initiative. Advisory invitation. Marcus opened it. The bank wanted him to join a youth financial literacy program. Not because he was wealthy. Because he had experienced what happened when institutions forgot the human being behind the account number. He stared at the invitation for a long moment. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to move on, to let the bank solve its own problems. That would have been easier. But Marcus remembered Jasmine's words. Staying silent was still a decision. He accepted. 6 months after the shredded check incident, Hawthorne Federal Bank published its first customer accountability report. The report did not mention Marcus by name. It did not need to. The changes were the point. New review procedures, additional employee training, independent audits, clearer customer appeal options. The bank did not become perfect overnight. No institution did. But it became harder for one person's assumption to become everyone else's truth. Marcus kept the replacement check in a secure folder, not because he needed a reminder of the money, because he needed a reminder of the morning when a machine destroyed a piece of paper and accidentally revealed something much larger. A check could be replaced. A reputation could be repaired. But trust had to be rebuilt one decision at a time. A year later, Marcus walked into a different bank branch while traveling for school. He needed to update some paperwork. The employee behind the counter looked at his documents, then looked at him. For a brief second, Marcus recognized the old moment, the hesitation, the calculation, the question before the question. Then the employee smiled. "Let me get someone who can help you with this. No suspicion, no assumptions. Just a process." Marcus sat down and waited, and this time, nobody needed to discover who he was before treating him like he belonged, because that was the lesson that stayed after everything else. A person's value should never depend on whether someone powerful recognizes their name.